Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook for October 3rd, 2025. Happy Friday to you. Let's start off with the National Hurricane Center with our two areas to watch in the Atlantic right now, and they are both increasing. This area here in the MDR is increasing in its chances for potential development. Yesterday, it was at a low chance. Well, now it's at a moderate chance of development, especially as we head into next week. This looks like this will be our next area here for potential development, and our next chance for another named storm in the Atlantic Basin, at least in the next week. And then we also have our area that is stalled right now off the Bahamas and off the southeast coast of Florida. And this only has a 10% chance of development to occur. And regardless, again, this will bring heavy rainfall to the southeast, especially to the Florida Peninsula and the Bahamas, and even probably portions of the Gulf Coast as well as we head into this weekend and into early next week. But development chances remain low. But the tropics still remain active even as we head into the month of October. There's still steam in the Atlantic right now, and that's likely to continue over at least the next week to 10 days. And as I've been mentioning for the past several days as well, likely beyond that too. But there's also quite a bit of activity going on in the Eastern Pacific. The steam is still steaming pretty strongly. There we have Tropical Storm Octave, and it has weakened a little bit today. It was 16 mile per hour yesterday. Today's down to 50 miles per hour with a minimum central pressure of 1,001 millibars. And this has dealt with a little bit of shear and not really has been able to strengthen. And the National Hurricane Center did forecast that it would become a hurricane yesterday. Probably won't do so anymore today, but it still is a tropical storm. And we also have another area here, Invest 99E, which is just off the southwest coast of Mexico. And this is more than likely about to become yet another system here in the Pacific, and likely our next named storm. And this will not be a direct impact to the coastline in terms of getting a direct landfall, but this will be pretty close to the southwestern coast of Mexico. And the National Hurricane Center even says here in the last sentence that interests along the southwestern coast of Mexico should monitor the progress of the system. And obviously that should happen given that this will be close by. But again, nothing right now indicating a potential direct landfall, at least over the next week. And I say that because we do have another area here, yet another area that's going to develop. The train of activity continuing on here in the Eastern Pacific. And this has a 30% chance of development for now, but there is model signals indicating potential development. So we'll see. And because of that, I'm pretty sure that we're probably going to see chances increase from here. And not impossible that this too is our next area in which we might see development in the Pacific. So the gravy train going strong there, and in general across both basins, quite an abundance of activity to track right now. And why is that? The number one reason, as I always point to, and a very good indicator for how favorable the atmosphere is right now, and that is the velocity potential anomalies, aka pretty much where the MJO is right now. And as you see in both the Atlantic and the Pacific basins, we have cells here of rising motion, meaning these blue and purple shades, especially purple, if these cells are very strong. But in the very least, we have weak cells of rising motion in the Atlantic right now, probably not really the MJO, but some convectively coupled Kelvin waves, which are moving by. And those pretty much act the same way as MJOs, although they are much shorter pulses and prime sometimes only specific areas at a specific time, rather than an MJO, which is a large-scale feature that lasts for weeks. But they still have the same effect. They still prime the atmosphere in the areas that they are in. And as you see right now in both the Pacific and the Atlantic, we have cells of rising motion And obviously that makes sense as to why activity is pretty decent in both basins right now, and especially in the Eastern Pacific here. There's a cell of rising motion, and obviously that's more aggressive, and obviously we have more activity to track in the Eastern Pacific. But again, the Atlantic is also probably going to catch up here in the next week or so, and you could even see it as well on the satellite imagery. Decent convective activity happening throughout the Atlantic right now, especially in the Eastern Atlantic. Here you have this pretty nice tropical wave just south of the Cabo Verde Islands and just off the west coast of Africa. And this is the wave, I believe, that is associated with the area that we need to watch here in the MDR. And also, coincidentally enough, going back to this graph, the rising motion is centered in the Atlantic over the Eastern Atlantic, and that's where we have this wave right now. So it is getting a boost from rising motion and probably a weak convectively coupled Kelvin wave. And we'll see how much this is able to consolidate over the next week here. And there's a little bit of uncertainty as to exactly how much this will consolidate, at least in the MDR, because this will still have to deal with some dry air, and shear, as you can see, is definitely an issue because we have quite a bit of these upper level lows, and you do actually have this low here, which is associated with the remnants of Imelda, but we have a front that extends downward from it, and I do believe that there is also an upper level low somewhere in here, and obviously with that brings dry air and shear, something that we've known quite a bit of this hurricane season, and so it's going to have to deal with that, and that might have an impact too on development here in the MDR. But then there's also quite a bit of convective activity here in the Caribbean as well, especially over Central America. And you know that as we head into the month of October, we start seeing the signs, and we start seeing the atmosphere once again prime itself for these Central American gyre setups, which help both aid in activity in the Atlantic and the Pacific. But especially in October is when we can get more decent things out of these Central American gyres in the Atlantic side of things. And I also went over the last several days sea surface temperature anomalies throughout the Caribbean and throughout the Gulf. And it really has been the case for most of this year, but especially right now, still well above normal. So we're going to have to watch these areas very closely over the next several weeks, but obviously focusing in here on the MDR, our wave, and then we also have another low pressure here in the Bahamas, and you really can't see it because not a lot of convective activity with it right now, which is why it has a low chance to develop. You know, there's some shear, there's also some dry air. Regardless, though, heavy rainfall for Florida and the Southeast and the Bahamas too heading into this weekend. And then we also move on to the Eastern Pacific, and you see where there is activity there right now. And obviously, with that, there is Tropical Storm Octave, and it's trying. It's battling some shear too, just like we have some shear in the Atlantic right now. And I'll take you to the forecast here for Octave. And now the National Hurricane Center just expects this to remain a tropical storm for the next several days here. And because yesterday they forecasted that this would become a hurricane, but now it's only expected to remain a tropical storm. But regardless, this is going to stay harmlessly out to sea, won't impact anybody, so we won't really need to worry about it. But there is obviously here Invest 99E, and you can tell quite a bit of convective activity associated with it. There's also definitely some low-level spin action occurring, so definitely not far away from becoming a tropical cyclone. And again, probably our next named storm here in the Pacific, and definitely has quite a bit of convective activity and a pretty huge cloud cover area that this encompasses. So even if this remains off the coast of Mexico, which most likely it will, you still can't rule out that we'll have some bands here make their way onshore onto Mexico, and definitely over the next several days, you'll have to watch out for the high surf and rip current risks that'll occur in the Pacific because of the activity that we'll have, as something that typically always happens, especially when we have a lot of activity in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. When both basins are active with multiple hurricanes churning about, we always have rip currents and high tides for whatever coastlines exist in those basins, and that's likely going to be the case here along the coast of Mexico over the next several days. Moving on to the 850 millibar vorticity map, just to give you an idea of what are the areas that are standing out right now that we need to watch. And obviously you can see, well, first of all, on the far left corner here, the signature for Octave, but that's kind of getting chopped out of the frame here. This frame only includes most of the Atlantic and some of the Eastern Pacific, but I can't find a map that includes a good chunk of both the Pacific and the Atlantic. But whatever, you can see enough of the Pacific that you could see here the signature for 99E, and again, has a pretty nice vorticity signature right now, probably not far off from becoming a storm here in the next several days, and likely going to be our next named storm in the Pacific. And can't remember what name it is off the top of my head right now, but obviously it's a P name. That I know for sure because we're on the O right now with Octave. But nonetheless, going to become a named storm here in the Pacific over the next several days. And then in the Atlantic, you see we have a pretty nice vorticity signature here in the Bahamas. Small, low-level center here. And again, not very favorable conditions, so won't see that much development occur out of this system. But again, still going to bring a lot of heavy rainfall to Florida. And Mandy, you see the very potent signature we have in the vorticity levels in the northern Atlantic here, associated with the remnants of Imelda. And it really just goes to show that, at least the low-level aspect of these storms do retain even as they become post-tropical. It's just the overall nature of it is what, no longer is a tropical system, but this still has a very potent remnant in its low level. And obviously, since it is a post-tropical system now, we have a huge front that hangs down from it. And you can even see it here pretty well in the Atlantic satellite imagery, quite a bit of convection along that front. And then there's also an upper level low somewhere in here. And then there's also another vorticity signature here. That's probably a tropical wave in the Western Atlantic. And then we have our area here in the Eastern Atlantic, and not much vorticity right now. But as I'll show you here on the models, over the next 7 to 10 days, there is quite a bit of development that is expected out of this system. And you can see here on the European ensembles for today, definitely quite a bit of development expected. Most of the ensembles here definitely show some development occurring, and you can even see that some ensembles have some pretty strong members too. So quite a solid signal for development here, at least on the European ensembles. And then you also have some of these members here showing activity in the Bahamas, although once again, this is more or less kind of not really an area we need to watch. But then as well, notice here towards the end of the frame, after around 7 days or so, we really start to see some ensembles here begin to come together in the Caribbean. So that is something to keep in mind for longer term, beyond the next 7 to 10 days, the potential for having to watch for development here in the Caribbean. And again, I've mentioned that the Caribbean is a favored area, climatologically speaking, in the Atlantic as we head into October, especially mid to late October. So we'll see what happens, but it is interesting that you do see some ensembles here begin to show up. But main focus is on the signal we have in the Atlantic, and I want to show you how it looks like on the GFS with the latest 12Z run, and the GFS develops it as well. Now, as I mentioned before, there are some shear and dry air issues that this is going to battle with, especially as this gets further on into the Western Atlantic. As I did mention to you, there is an upper level low near the islands. So you do see here that the GFS develops this. Almost looks like it tries to come together as early as the late weekend into early next week. and then this develops obviously and becomes a system of some sort. Tries to consolidate a little bit here as we head into late next week, and then this becomes a system, and this heads straight for the islands, although weakens a little bit, and then kind of moves slowly here through the islands, and then beyond that intensifies quite a bit and probably becomes a hurricane here as this heads northward in the subtropics. But one area that obviously is impacted here is the islands. So if there is one area that you need to be keeping an eye on pretty closely here over the next week, is the Northern Caribbean islands. So Puerto Rico, the British and U.S. Virgin Islands, Martinique, the Barbuda, and islands like that. If you are in the northeastern Caribbean, you know what island you're probably on. You'll have to watch very closely, and we'll have to monitor things here over the next week or so. But obviously, intensity-wise, I'll just show you here on the upper level wind pattern. There is a little bit of an upper level cutoff low that this will have to deal with. And there's actually an upper level anticyclone that develops here over the top of the storm. But it's a matter of whether or not it's able to couple. And obviously it does, especially in the longer range as this gets beyond the Caribbean, and starts to intensify quite a bit as this heads into the subtropics. But this is obviously more than 10 days out, so not going to really be too focused on it. But bottom line, the signal is there. The GFS shows development, and they show a little bit of weakening. This probably will deal with some issues in the MDR, but the signal is there nonetheless. So the GFS does develop it. What about the Euro? Let's see what the Euro does here on the 12Z. And they also develop it too, kind of. The Euro shows a much weaker storm. I guess the Euro showing much more in the way of wind shear and dry air, preventing development from occurring with this system. But this does still take a beeline towards the Northern Caribbean islands. So if you're in the Northern Caribbean, you'll want to watch here over the next several weeks as things will look very interesting. And we have another area to watch here for potential development in the MDR. And it's too early to say how strong this will be, or it's too early to be for sure whether or not this will actually develop, but it is another area to watch. Chances are increasing, and I just showed you both models have a pretty decent signal for some sort of development to occur, and we'll see. When both of the models show something, especially both major models like the GFS and the Euro, you'll definitely want to start thinking that maybe the signal is legit, and obviously the signal is pretty prevalent on both the European and the GFS, especially the GFS, and obviously too the European ensembles. So it looks like we'll have to watch very closely here over the next week, heading into this weekend and then heading into early next week as well. And I'll definitely be doing that quite a bit, as we'll continue to do these video updates every single day, continuing on here once again from now all the way till the end of the hurricane season on November 30th. But that's going to do it for today's update. Hope you found it informative. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you can get videos the moment I upload them, and also get notifications the moment I go live, which maybe we might need to do eventually if any of these areas or anything in the Atlantic comes up that might be very impactful, which obviously that is still possible in the month of October and even November too. But we are still in the peak of the season in October. That's generally the point I'm getting at. So don't let your guard down, and I'll definitely continue to be posting more videos once again here over the next several days. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and as always, I'll be back with more tomorrow.